My cousin Nate has been in the Coast Guard for more than 10 years. He's not the type to exaggerate or spin stories. Honestly, he's one of the most down-to-earth, no-nonsense people I know. He's practical to the core, someone who loves boats, order, and quiet structure. The lighthouse is automated, but it still needs occasional check-ins for repairs, which is why the Coast Guard sends people out every now and then. Normally, it's a solo trip. But the year before, there were some weird electrical failures, stuff that couldn't be explained. So this time, they sent 2 people, Nate and another guy named Russell. Definitely not a horror fan, and he doesn't believe in ghosts or anything remotely superstitious. But one story he told me in the summer of 2022 made me question that. Even during maintenance, the light's supposed to stay active. Something was jammed in the mechanism. When they looked closer, they found it this large piece of cloth, dark and damp, wedged deep into the gears. It looked like a blanket or maybe an old coat, and it was soaked in some kind of slimy moss. The smell was awful, like wet seaweed left to rot in the sun. If the light stops, ships could be in danger. He jumped up and shook Russell awake, and together they made their way up the narrow spiral stairs to the top of the lighthouse. I asked him to tell it again and again, just to see if any details would change. They never did. This time, when they reached the top, they found a different kind of cloth. It wasn't that old coat. It was smaller, thinner. He was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep when he heard Russell whispering. Not to him, just whispering into the room, toward the corner. Looked like a scarf, or maybe a shawl. It was red, with frayed edges, and soaked through with seawater. Nate sat up and asked who he was talking to. Just sat by the window for hours, muttering things under his breath about noises in the walls, voices on the stairs. Russell turned and looked at him, eyes unfocused, and said, "What do you mean?" I wasn't saying anything. Someone standing on the rocks, just barely visible at the edge of the beacon's light. And when the light swept back, the figure was gone. Watching, it even had tiny crustaceans clinging to it, like it had been dragged straight from the bottom of the ocean. Every time, word for word, it came out the same. And that's what made it so unsettling. No explanation. They pulled it out, tossed it off the balcony into the ocean breeze, and went back to bed, figuring it was just a weird one-time thing. At that point, they started thinking maybe someone was messing with them. Or worse, maybe something was. Nate asked, "Did you go up there?" Russell shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Did you?" This took place back in 2017, when Nate got assigned to a lighthouse way off the coast of Maine. The place was called Matinous Rock. And when I say way off, I mean remote. You can only get there by boat or helicopter. It's basically a jagged chunk of rock in the ocean, with just a single lighthouse and one small building that holds fuel and maintenance tools. Cold, windy, repetitive. During the day, they went through routine tasks, checking the mechanics of the beacon, testing backup batteries, refueling the generator, and scraping off salt and rust from metal surfaces. They locked both the beacon room and the bottom entrance. They read books, ate canned meals, played cards. It was lonely, sure, but predictable. Nothing unusual. But whatever was happening wasn't done with them. They blocked the stairwell with crates at night. They were thorough. Nights were quiet. There's no power grid, no plumbing, barely any cell signal. The first few days were exactly what you'd expect. But on the 4th night, something shifted. Nate woke up around 2 a.m., and something just felt off. Not like he was sick or in pain, more like the air had changed. He described it like that feeling you get just before a thunderstorm, when the air goes heavy and still, but when he looked outside, the sky was completely clear. No clouds, no wind, just silence. Around the same time, just past 2 in the morning, Nate woke up and saw the light wasn't rotating again. He sat up and scanned the room. Everything seemed normal until he noticed something odd. The beacon light wasn't rotating. Now, this was a big deal. When they got to the beacon room, they saw the gears were still turning, but the light itself wasn't moving. They had no idea how it got there. The door had been locked from the inside. The windows were sealed. No wind, no birds. It wasn't. The very next night, same thing. That's when things stopped feeling random. They double-checked every possible entry point. Doors, windows, maintenance hatches, everything was sealed. There were no signs of forced entry. After that, they started taking precautions. Coming down from the top of the lighthouse. One step at a time. Not wind, not creaking boards. Actual footsteps. Footsteps. On the 7th night, something happened that Nate still doesn't like to talk about. He was saying weird things. Fragmented sentences. Like he was talking to someone. Russell was standing at the base of the stairs, staring up. Nate let it go. But later that night, he woke again and saw Russell sitting at the window, just staring down at the rocks. When he asked what he was doing, Russell said he thought he'd seen someone the night before. After that, Russell started changing. He barely spoke. He stopped sleeping. Then, on the 9th night, they both heard it. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Nate looked across the room. Neither of them had. They just stood there in silence, listening. The footsteps stopped. And that stillness after the complete, suffocating silence was even worse. That night, they barricaded the door with a dresser and slept with knives under their pillows. 2 more nights passed, and they barely slept. Every sound made them jump. Every creak in the walls or groan of the old lighthouse set their nerves on edge. But it was the 11th night that really pushed things past the breaking point. Once again, the beacon failed around 2 a.m. It wasn't cloth in the gears. The massive industrial-grade bulb, the kind that takes effort, tools even, to remove, had been unscrewed and placed upright in the center of the floor, just sitting there. Nate and Russell forced themselves upstairs, flashlights in hand, expecting another piece of sea-soaked cloth jammed into the gear system. A hand, it came out of the wall. Russell was pale, barely breathing, and muttering to himself. Someone was up here, he kept saying. Someone was up here. Nothing clear, just static and a few scrambled words. But the voice had said something about someone being there with us. But when they got there, something was different. The door to the beacon room, usually sealed, always locked behind them, was wide open. Not a word. But he told me straight up, he'll never go back to that rock. Not for anything. He just stared off into the water. A few months later, he resigned from the Coast Guard. Never told anyone what really happened on Natness Rock. One night, we decided to hang out. Nothing serious, just a spontaneous, low-effort adventure. She lived like 5 minutes from me, so I picked her up and we went for a drive to a nearby park that was technically closed. We had a couple of White Claws and talked in the dark. It felt risky, but she was so confident. I didn't question it. Something about the massive structure glowing in the dark with its lone sweeping beam. It doesn't feel right. It feels otherworldly. Like you're not supposed to be that close when everything's quiet and shut down. Total ghost town. She said she'd done it before, even pre-COVID. No other cars were around. We kept our flashlights low, careful not to draw attention. The trail ran right along the cliffs, narrow and uneven, rocks scattered like nature's booby traps. So we parked, had one more drink in the lot, and then started walking. I turned around and saw her flashlight was aimed behind us right, and a figure standing on the rocks just stood there in the dark. He was wearing a coat with a hood pulled up, not slightly ajar, swung wide like someone had kicked it open. Looked like a black guy, though we couldn't really tell much else: age, expression, anything. The beacon had been deliberately tampered with. This wasn't a jam. He said, "Y'all want to buy some coke?" I called out to him, asked if he worked there. He didn't say a word, didn't move, not cracked. She passed me, and I followed behind. But then I realized he was following us. Same spot, same pace, no closer, no farther. Just there, silent, steady, keeping the same distance no matter how far we went. The wind was roaring through the opening, making the metal groan, and inside. But then the guy finally spoke. Down the stairs, skipping steps, practically falling over each other. People were baking bread, watching Tiger King, swiping aimlessly on dating apps. I was single at the time, and like most people, just bored. I started chatting with this girl I'd followed on Instagram for years. Her name was Sophia, but she went by Soph. What was this guy doing here, alone, in the dark, on a cliff? They locked themselves in the sleeping quarters, pushed the dresser back in place, and sat in the corner. Nate stayed awake, clutching a flashlight. Russell started rocking back and forth, mumbling things to someone who wasn't there. Nate froze. I liked the idea of doing something a little reckless. So we drove east, drinks finished, music low. In fact, she was the one who suggested we drive all the way out to Montauk to check out the lighthouse and walk the cliffside path. Nate bent down to inspect the bulb when he suddenly felt something brush against his back cold and quick, like a wet hand grazing his spine. He spun around, heart racing. Nothing but Russell. Russell was staring at the wall, eyes wide, finger trembling as he pointed. "I saw it," he whispered. He's been to dozens of isolated outposts since then. That was it for them. They ran. The next morning, Nate had had enough. He used the emergency satellite phone, the one reserved for only serious immediate issues, and called in for an early pickup. Told them there had been a critical mechanical failure, and they needed to be extracted as soon as possible. They were told a boat would arrive that afternoon. But when the crew got there, something didn't add up. Rebellious, but in a cool, confident kind of way. She didn't care about fences or rules. The deckhand helping them off the island asked about the distress call they had made earlier, specifically at 2:12 a.m., a garbled transmission. Only Nate hadn't touched the radio until morning. Russell said nothing on the ride back. Nate still does lighthouse maintenance. Now here's where the story gets even more chilling. Fast forward to the COVID lockdowns. You know, that weird point in time when everyone was stuck at home going stir crazy. We lived pretty close, both in Suffolk County, Long Island, about a half hour from the Hamptons, maybe an hour from Montauk. Right away, I picked up on her vibe. Technically, the lighthouse grounds were closed after sunset, possibly completely off limits during lockdown, but I didn't really hesitate. When we got there, she told me to just park in the lot near the lighthouse. Seeing a lighthouse at night, up close, is eerie. Soph led the way to the cliff walk. It wasn't the main entrance, more like a side trail that snuck around the edge. We were halfway through the walk when Soph stopped and said my name. With both of our lights on him, we could make him out better. I followed up. Sorry, we're leaving. At first, I was just nervous that we'd been caught trespassing. Finding out he wasn't a security guard should have been a relief. It wasn't. If anything, it made everything worse. I told him, "Nah, man, we're good," and nodded for Soph to keep moving. Every time I glanced back with the flashlight, he was there. That walk along the cliff felt like it lasted forever. Every step, I kept glancing over my shoulder. That guy never said anything else, never got closer, never fell behind. Just followed silent, steady, like a shadow with legs. It turned what should have been a spontaneous, fun night into a nerve-wracking nightmare. Eventually, we reached the end of the cliff walk. The moment we stepped off the rocks and onto the grass, we didn't even speak. We just started moving quickly, straight toward the parking lot. That sense of unease had only grown stronger, and our pace quickened with it. The problem was, we weren't alone anymore. As we made our way back to the car, we realized 2 more figures were approaching us from behind. Different people. We hadn't seen them earlier. They weren't near the lighthouse when we arrived. They just appeared. Now there were 3 of them. One trailing us from the cliffs, and 2 others cutting across the field toward us. Too real, like it could have gone really, really bad. They just stood there in the red glow of the taillights, like they'd done their job just by scaring the hell out of us. It still gives me this awful chill when I think about it. Something about it felt too close. But then, years later, I had a conversation with an old friend named Gregory, who introduced me to a story that chilled me in an entirely different way. Historians wanted to restore it. No one knew if it was even structurally safe. I didn't want to panic, didn't want to run, and risk making this worse. Built like a tugboat, skin like leather from working near salt air for decades. Eyes that had seen things most of us couldn't imagine. Second floor was mostly empty. Ian had done everything: marine salvage, underwater inspections, ship repair, coastal infrastructure work. No gulls, no wind, no waves slapping against the rock. They owned this old, abandoned lighthouse on a remote rock island, just a slab of stone, maybe 300 feet wide, surrounded by crashing waves. Developers wanted to knock it down. No docks, no buildings. The Coast Guard had to drop him off by boat at high tide. But now, food, tools, a sleeping bag, a radio. Same routine he'd done dozens of times. It was supposed to be a quick assignment, 4 days tops. The lower level was a little warped, but safe. Not just peaceful, but oppressively silent. Just a low hum of silence, like the whole world had hit mute. Third floor had a tiny old bunk area, clearly unused for decades. Ian had seen fog before he worked on the coast for years, but this was different. Still, it didn't sit right with him. Dense, blinding. He couldn't see 5 feet past the windows. On day 1, it was shut tight. Rusted hinges, completely stuck. It was cracked open. Just a sliver, but enough to see into the blackness inside. The kind of silence that pulls you out of sleep because your brain knows something's off. Ian set up camp on the ground floor near the generator room where it was warmer. The lighthouse had that salty, rusty, decaying smell you'd expect from an old coastal structure. The tower was about 50 feet tall, classic early 1900s design, spiral staircase, weathered, but still standing strong. A raccoon maybe, but the sound didn't match. It was heavier, rhythmic, measured. If something broke near the ocean, you called Ian. Damp, like it had been underwater. Maybe just bored people looking to mess with strangers. I don't know. But I do know this. I'm never going back to that lighthouse after dark. Not even in daylight, to be honest. Certified, experienced, the kind of person governments would hire for dangerous inspections. Gregory told me when Ian told this story, it never sounded like a ghost tale. It was just facts, laid out plain and raw, and that's what made it terrifying. I just looked at Soph and said, "Walk. Don't stop. Don't talk." Roughly the size of a lunchbox, covered in moss. The adrenaline wore off halfway home, and all that was left was this heavy, sick feeling. I dropped Soph off, and we didn't even say much, just a thanks and good night. We're still in touch today. But that night, that stuck with me. I couldn't make it out. My heart was pounding too loudly. Maybe it was a gang. Maybe just some sketchy drug dealers or local troublemakers. Go out there, inspect the place, and make a call. We ignored him. Just kept walking. Faster now. Shoulders tense. Eyes locked on the car ahead. But one of the new guys shouted something. As we reached the car, I fumbled for the keys. The second we jumped in and slammed the doors, two of them were already trying the handles, one on the passenger side, one on the back. We screamed. I slammed the lock button and threw the car into reverse, the only direction I could go without hitting one of them. But it was too quiet. That was the first thing he noticed. Cold, damp, but not unusual. As I backed out of the lot, one of the guys kicked the back bumper and shouted something at us, but they didn't follow once we were moving. Just noted it on his clipboard, shut the door again, and went on with the day. The ride back was dead silent. Our hearts were still racing. More like the absence of sound, a drop in pressure. We did hang out again after that, a few times actually. My friends all had theories. That encounter should have been the scariest thing I ever heard around a lighthouse. This was about his buddy Ian. Gregory said Ian was one of those guys who gave off instant credibility, and he was a diver. A good one. Back in 2013, Ian got hired by a small coastal county up in Washington state. That was Ian's job. There wasn't much out there, just the lighthouse itself, a generator shed, and some old rusted scaffolding from decades back. He packed light. When he arrived, the place was quiet. He did a full inspection, support beams, stairwell integrity, window seals. The first night passed without incident. Then came the second day, and with it, a wall of fog so thick it felt solid. Still, he pressed on with the inspection. That's when he noticed something odd. About halfway up the stairs to the beacon room, there was a maintenance closet built into the stone wall. He figured maybe the humidity had shifted the metal. Inside the closet, pushed into the back corner, was a wooden box. He didn't touch it. But that night, something woke him. Not a sound exactly. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate. On the metal stairs above him. Not coming down, going up. At first, he thought it was an animal. Ian turned on his flashlight and waited, eyes on the stairwell entrance, but nothing came. Eventually, it stopped, and silence returned. The next morning, Ian searched the entire lighthouse from top to bottom. Every floor, every storage room, even climbed onto the roof. Nothing. No sign of animals. No sign that anyone else had been there, except for one thing. That box, the moss-covered one from the closet, it was no longer inside. It had been moved. Now it was sitting halfway out into the stairwell, like someone had dragged it out and left it there for him to find. Still damp, still nailed shut, still just sitting there. He stared at it for a long time, weighed it in his hands. It was heavier than it looked. Waterlogged wood, maybe something inside. He didn't try to open it. Something about it told him not to. Instead, he placed it at the base of the stairs and went outside to clear his head. That's when he saw the footprints. Bare feet, wet, muddy prints leading from the north side of the lighthouse toward the edge of the cliff. 10, maybe 12 steps. And then, nothing. They just stopped. No return trail. No smudges, no disturbance. Just clean, human-sized bare footprints that ended at a sheer drop straight into the ocean. He stood there, heart pounding, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe someone had made it to the island somehow. Maybe they came ashore after he arrived. But there were no boats scheduled until the pickup the next day. No reports, no radio chatter. And besides, how would they have gotten up the cliffs barefoot without leaving more tracks? He went back inside and locked every door, every hatch. Then he wedged the stairwell shut with an old iron pipe and stayed on the ground floor for the rest of the day. He didn't eat, didn't nap, just waited for nightfall with the radio in his lap. That night was the worst. Around 1:30 in the morning, something slammed the door to the beacon room. Hard. The force shook dust loose from the ceiling. Ian jolted upright in his sleeping bag, flashlight already in hand. Then came the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. From inside the wall. Not the door. Not the window. The wall itself, like someone was standing just behind the bricks, knocking with their bare knuckles. 1, 2, 3. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Just sat there frozen with the light aimed at the stairs, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Then the knocking stopped. When the sun finally came up, he checked the stairwell. The pipe was still wedged in place. No signs of forced entry. But the closet? Wide open. The box? Gone. That was it for Ian. He grabbed the radio and called in for an emergency pickup, told them there was a medical issue. They promised to send a boat as soon as possible, but warned that the fog hadn't lifted. Navigation would be slow. He packed everything and waited by the landing ledge. The fog never broke. For nearly 7 hours, Ian sat there wrapped in his jacket, watching the thick white mist swallow the world around him. It was like being trapped in a snow globe. No sound, no sightlines, no sense of direction. Then he heard footsteps. Behind him, on the gravel, near the base of the lighthouse. He spun around, flashlight ready, but nothing, just white. No shapes, no movement. But he was sure of what he heard. Not wind, not echoes. Footsteps. He didn't go back to the building. He didn't move from that ledge. He just sat there, eyes wide, until the distant blare of a boat horn cut through the stillness. The rescue crew arrived just after nightfall. When they helped him onto the boat, One of the deckhands asked why he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Ian didn't answer. He just handed over the clipboard and told them, flatly, "The structure is compromised. It's unsafe. Needs to be sealed off." He filed a report when they got back. A short one. Focused on structural issues, warped floors, corroded hinges, cracks in the foundation. Nothing unusual on paper. Nothing about footprints. Or knocking. Or the box. Gregory told me Ian never mentioned any of that to the county. Not because he was scared they wouldn't believe him, but because part of him thought maybe he'd gone a little mad out there. Isolation does strange things to people. 4 days alone in thick fog, surrounded by nothing but the sea and a dead building. It can make you question your own senses. Ian never returned to that lighthouse. He wrapped up the rest of his projects that year and quietly phased himself out of fieldwork altogether. Within a year, he retired from contract work completely. When Gregory asked him just once if it was because of the lighthouse, Ian just gave a shrug and said, "I've seen enough out there." But the thing that stuck with Gregory the most was what Ian said after. Almost like an afterthought. Quiet, simple. Some places are meant to be left alone. They just need time. And silence. That was it. Gregory tried to look up the lighthouse later. Wanted to see if there were other reports, news stories, historical records, anything. But the coordinates Ian had jotted down didn't match any known location. The county's land registry had vague mentions of an old structure on a rock island off the coast, but no name, no listed contractor, no photos. Just a line in a forgotten file. It's like the place was erased. Like Ian had never been there in the first place. And maybe that's what scares me the most, not what Ian said, but what no one else ever did. Because when a man who has spent his life fixing broken things decides to never touch the ocean again, you start to wonder if some things are broken for a reason.